What if the most powerful thing you could do for your mental health, your emotional stability, your spiritual life was something God commanded you to do 3,000 years ago? And most Christians today have completely forgotten it exists. Not prayer, not fasting, not church attendance, something older, something quieter, something so simple that when you first hear it, you'll almost certainly underestimate it. And here's what makes this conversation different from every other Christian self-improvement video you've ever watched. We're not going to talk about trying harder. We're not going to build another to-do list for your spiritual life. We're going to look at something God designed into the architecture of your brain before neuroscience even had a name for it. By the time this is over, you're going to understand exactly why your mind keeps defaulting to anxiety, fear, and negativity, and exactly what the Bible has been prescribing as the solution since before the book of Psalms was written. Let's start with something that happens inside your brain every single night while you're sleeping. Scientists call it memory consolidation. While you sleep, your brain isn't resting, it's sorting through everything you experienced during the day, every thought, every emotion, every repeated pattern. It's deciding what to keep and what to let go. The ones it keeps get stronger. The ones it discards fade away. And here's the part that changes everything. Your brain does not sort by what is true. It does not sort by what is healthy. It does not sort by what serves you best. It sorts by what you gave the most attention to during the day. Whatever you focused on most, whatever you returned to again and again throughout your waking hours, that's what your brain reinforces, strengthens, makes into your default. Your brain is not biased toward truth. It is biased toward repetition. This is why anxious people become more anxious not because their circumstances are necessarily worse than everyone else's, but because anxiety keeps getting their attention. And whatever gets your attention gets stronger. This is why bitter people grow more bitter. Not because they have more reasons to be bitter, but because bitterness keeps getting rehearsed in the mind, replayed, revisited, reinforced, until it becomes the lens through which every experience gets filtered. Your brain is an attention-following machine. It builds highways toward whatever you consistently point it at. Now here's where God enters the conversation. Turn to Joshua chapter 1. Joshua is standing at the most terrifying moment of his life. Moses is dead. The entire nation of Israel is looking to him as their new leader, and they're about to cross into a land filled with fortified cities and armies that have made grown men weep. If there was ever a moment for God to hand someone a military strategy, a battle plan, a leadership framework, this was it. But look at what God actually says to Joshua. In verse 8, "This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate on it day and night." Day and night. Not once a week at a service, not in a quiet 10 minutes between breakfast and the school run. Day and night. And then God makes an extraordinary promise, do this, and then you will make your way prosperous. And then you will have good success. Notice the sequence. The prosperity, the success, they're not the starting point. They're the result. And they're the result not of strategy, not of strength, not of talent, but of what Joshua chose to meditate on. God wasn't just giving Joshua spiritual advice. He was describing a neurological process that science is only now beginning to fully understand. Here's what neuroscience has discovered about the brain that makes this verse extraordinary. There's a system in your brain called the Reticular Activating System, the RAS. Think of it as your brain's personal filter. Every single second, your brain receives roughly 11 million pieces of information from your environment sites, sounds, sensations, smells. But your conscious mind can only process about 40 of them. 40 out of 11 million. So your brain has to decide which 40 deserve your attention. And it makes that decision based on one simple criteria. What have you told it matters? The RAS works like a search engine. Whatever you consistently feed into it becomes the filter through which it scans reality. If you're constantly rehearsing fear, your RAS will scan your environment and find reasons to be afraid. If you're constantly rehearsing lack, it will filter out evidence of provision and highlight evidence of scarcity. But here's the other side of that. If you consistently meditate on truth, on the promises of God, your RAS begins scanning your environment through that lens instead. Same circumstances, same day, same life. But now your brain is filtering for evidence of provision, evidence of faithfulness, evidence of God at work. Because that's what you've been consistently feeding it. God told Joshua to meditate on the word day and night, not because he needed Joshua to memorize a legal document, but because he knew that whatever Joshua's mind consistently returned to would become the filter through which Joshua experienced reality. And a man whose mind is filtered through the promises of God will face a fortified city very differently than a man whose mind is filtered through his own fear. Now, I need to show you what meditation actually meant in the ancient world, because we've almost entirely lost it. In Hebrew, the word used in Joshua 1:8 is hagah. And hagah does not mean what most of us picture when we hear the word meditation. It doesn't mean sitting cross-legged with your eyes closed. Hagah literally means to mutter, to murmur, to speak quietly under your breath, to roll something around in your mouth like you're tasting it slowly. It's the same word used in Psalm 1, where the blessed man meditates on God's law day and night. And it's the same word used in Isaiah 31, describing the sound a lion makes when it's quietly growling over its prey. Possessive, unhurried, deeply focused. The habit God is prescribing isn't passive reading. It's active, repeated, spoken engagement with truth turning a verse over in your mind, speaking it quietly, returning to it throughout the day, letting it interrupt your other thoughts. And here's why the speaking part matters. When you speak something out loud, even quietly, even in a whisper, you engage an entirely different set of neural pathways than when you simply think it. The motor cortex activates. The auditory cortex processes the sound. The language centers of the brain get recruited. You're not just thinking the thought, you're writing it into your brain through multiple channels at once. God built the practice of speaking the word as a neurological strategy long before we had the science to explain why it works. But I want to show you what this looks like when someone gets it wrong, because most of us have made this exact mistake. Think about King David's son, Solomon. Solomon started his reign as the wisest man who had ever lived. In 1 Kings chapter 3, God appears to him in a dream and offers him anything he wants. And Solomon asks not for wealth, not for long life, not for victory over his enemies, but for wisdom. God honors it. Scripture says there had never been anyone like Solomon, before or since. But then something begins to shift. 1 Kings chapter 11 tells us what happened. Solomon began to accumulate foreign wives, political alliances, horses from Egypt, silver and gold in quantities that made counting them meaningless. And as his life filled up with the things the surrounding nations valued, his meditation changed. It wasn't a dramatic fall. It was a gradual reorientation of attention. He stopped meditating on the word that had made him wise and began meditating on the patterns of the world around him. In his brain, the same extraordinarily gifted brain that had produced the book of Proverbs began to reshape itself around what it was now consistently exposed to. By the end of 1 Kings 11, the wisest man who ever lived is worshiping on the high places of foreign gods, not because God abandoned him, because he stopped giving God his attention. And whatever stops getting your attention stops having influence over you. The most gifted mind in human history became spiritually ordinary because of what he chose to habitually meditate on. Your brain is not the problem. What you consistently give it is. Now let me bring this into the room you're actually sitting in right now. Researchers at Harvard Medical School studied what the mind does when it's not actively engaged in a task. They called it mind wandering. And what they found was striking. The average human mind wanders for roughly 47% of waking hours, nearly half your life. And during that, wandering those gaps between focused activity your brain defaults to whatever neural pathways are most deeply established. For most people, that means anxiety about the future, regret about the past, comparison with others, and a low-grade internal monologue that's almost entirely negative. The Harvard researchers found something else too, something that confirms what God has been saying since the book of Joshua. People were significantly less happy during mind-wandering moments than during focused moments, even when the task they were focused on wasn't particularly enjoyable. The undisciplined wandering mind is an unhappy mind. The mind that has been trained to return, that has a place to come back to functions differently. Not because the circumstances changed, because the default changed. And the biblical practice of meditation is precisely the tool for changing the default. When you spend time in the morning meditating on a verse, speaking it quietly, turning it over, letting it settle, you're not just having a devotional moment. You're planting a flag in your neural landscape. You're giving your mind a place to return to during that 47%. So when that wave of anxiety hits at 2 in the afternoon and your mind begins to wander, it now has a direction to wander toward, instead of being pulled back into the same old, dark, familiar pathways. This is where the Apostle Paul makes one of the most neurologically precise statements in all of Scripture. In Philippians 4 verse 8, he writes, "Whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, think about these things." Think about these things, not feel these things, not achieve these things. Think about them. Paul isn't writing a positive thinking self-help formula. He's writing from prison. He's writing to people facing genuine suffering, genuine persecution, genuine uncertainty about tomorrow. And his instruction isn't to pretend the difficulty away. It's to deliberately, intentionally, repeatedly direct the mind toward what is true. Because he understood something your brain's own neuroscience confirms. Repeated thought creates structural change in the brain. The word Paul uses in the original Greek for think is logizomai. And logizomai does not mean a casual passing glance. It means to carefully consider, to calculate, to dwell on, to let something occupy your mind with intention. It's the same word used in accounting logizomai is what you do when you add up a column of numbers slowly and carefully to make sure every figure is correct. Paul is saying, take the true, the honorable, the pure, the lovely, and do careful, repeated, intentional mental accounting with them, not once, consistently, because that, careful, repeated, intentional accounting is literally rebuilding the brain. So what does this actually look like when you close this video and walk back into your life? It's not complicated, but it is consistent. And consistency is the entire point. It looks like choosing one verse, just one, and carrying it with you through the day the way you carry your phone, not reading it once and feeling good about it returning to it, speaking it quietly in traffic, murmuring it under your breath when the anxiety starts to climb, letting it be the thing your mind lands on in the gap between tasks instead of the usual spiral. It looks like catching the moment your mind begins to wander toward fear or bitterness or comparison, and instead of fighting those thoughts, simply returning, not with force, not with condemnation towards yourself for wandering in the first place, just a quiet return. I bring my mind back to what is true. Every single return is a repetition. Every repetition is a new neural pathway being traced. Every pathway being traced is your brain being physically reshaped by what you're giving your attention to. This isn't inspiration. This is biology, aligned with Scripture. God didn't design the practice of meditating on His Word as a religious obligation to prove your devotion. He designed it as a biological renovation, the mechanism by which a human mind is transformed from the inside out rather than managed from the outside in. The brain you have right now is not permanent. It's the product of what you've been consistently giving your attention to up until today. And the brain you'll have 1 year from now will be the product of what you choose to give your attention to starting today. God said meditate on this day and night. Science says neurons that fire together wire together. They're describing the same phenomenon from different directions. The biblical habit that rewires your brain isn't a secret. It's been sitting in Joshua chapter 1 for 3,000 years. The only question is whether you'll give it your attention. So this week, one verse, one day. Speak it quietly in the morning. Return to it when your mind wanders. Let it interrupt the spiral. Just one return, and then another, and then another. And watch what God does with a mind that keeps coming back to Him. See you in the next video.